Hi, I'm Alex. Can I just get a quick show of hands? Who still uses Angular 1? Don't be shy, because I do too. OK, and who's really familiar with AngularJS directives? OK, the last presentation was awesome, and it taught you all these new things for the new Angular. I'm going to tell you about some new novel ways to use the it taught you new things about the new Angular. I'm going to tell you novel things about the old Angular and how I used it to create a digital coloring book. So real quick about me, I work in this building. My day job is as a software engineer at Google on search. But my presentation today is completely unrelated from my work. It's just a coincidence that I used Angular. And I started working on this coloring book while a technology resident at an arts center in Brooklyn called Pioneerworks. And that's what I'm going to be telling you about today. So my personal links are up there. I got a GitHub, a Twitter I don't really use. And you can find the rest on a personal site, things like LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever you care about. So today I'm going to tell you about a coloring book that I made. And that probably sounds goofy, but I invite you throughout this to follow along. Please go now on your mobile device or your desktop to coloring-book.co, and please follow along throughout this. I made a coloring book about group theory. Group theory is something in math. So one way to see this is as an art project that allows me to reach a mass audience with educational content. And so this is a coloring book created for the web first. And I say for the web first in that it's on the web, as you can see, but it's really easy to export it to a PDF so that anyone can print it out themselves for free. And that's part of the design. And all of the designs, all the illustrations in this book are created by algorithms that are generated on the fly, but have encoded within them the group symmetric or the mathematical properties that are being represented in the content on the pages, and also incorporate a sense of randomness so that every copy of this book is slightly different. See how each time these designs are regenerated, it's slightly different. So the web version is like the book version in that the written educational content is on the left and the illustrations are on the right. And the illustrations complement the web content. And in the same way you leaf through a book, you can leaf through this digital book in that way. Who recognizes this art? Anyone? All right, so I want to jump into some artistic inspiration and background. And if at any point this bores you, we can jump to the next part. So please raise your hand if it's getting boring. Ask a question to slow me down if it's going too quickly. But all of this art was created by the same artist named MC Escher, and he lived in the early 1900s, died in 1970. And all of his art had a mathematical background. And he's known for creating this art that explored the limits of infinity and created what are called wallpaper patterns. He was kind of written off during his time, but the way in which he generated them or went about creating them was mathematical in his process, and he corresponded with a lot of mathematicians. He was also inspired by the art in the Alhambra. He noticed the genius in these geometric patterns. This is a Moorish palace, and because of Islamic rules, none of the art could represent lifelike forms, which created a lot of genius on the geometric side. And he copied down a lot of these patterns with his wife when he visited, so that then he could learn from it and integrate it into his own art. All right, so now I'm going to do a quick deep dive into some of his own art so that you can understand some of the things I'm getting at when I tell you about this project. All right, here's one of his pieces that you might be familiar with. And when you look at this, I want you to imagine this image as no boundaries, that the pattern continues past the borders. And I want you to consider one horse a unit. And so can you see how we could translate this pattern by 2 units and the image would be the same? If you took one horse and you translated it 2 horses over, we would see the same pattern. Is that clear to everyone? All right, cool. And you could do the same thing down. And once you have both horizontal and vertical translation, you also have diagonal translations. And that's because there's an underlying grid that he created this pattern with. Well, what about when you take away color? Then you don't have to translate over 2 horse units. You could translate just 1 horse unit. What did color do there? Well, that's kind of what this coloring book is about. All right, zooming in on some dragonflies. Do you see the translations again? Anyone? Great. Again, there's an underlying grid, right? There's something else here. Do you see how there's more symmetry? How if you drew a line through the center of these dragonflies, you could reflect across that line, and you would again have the same image? Yeah, there's mirror symmetry as well, both horizontal and vertical. There are also rotations. Imagine sticking a needle through the center of these diamonds and then rotating the entire image by half a circle around it. Do you see how, again, it would be unchanged? What about these points? You could rotate by 1/4 of the way around a circle, right? All right, real quick, again, you see translation. Again, you see half turns. Do you see them? You could turn by 1/3 of a circle, by 1/6 of a circle, and this time the underlying grid is a grid of triangles. So these are the symmetry transformations of the wallpaper patterns. And for each one of these, you could imagine taking one piece of these patterns and then creating an algorithm and writing in some JavaScript to then take that one piece and use these transformations again and again to create this underlying pattern, right? And that's basically what Escher did. He created these blocks out of wood, and he followed Polya's mathematical paper on how to pursue that endeavor. And this is really complicated, so for now we're just going to talk about along one axis because a simpler version of the wallpaper patterns are the Frieze patterns. So here's a piece of my Angular app. I want you to view each of these patterns that goes across the page as one pattern, but you'll notice that they all have translation, and that even though these patterns look different, they're really the same in that they're generated by just starting with one piece that then translates across. All right, what does this one have? Not just translation, but yeah. And this one, again, vertical reflection. This one has something else, which is called glide reflection, where you reflect at the same time as translating across. What about this one? Rotation, yeah. And you can build up by combining these. This has all of the symmetries that we saw. Patterns are ideal for computer-generated art, and if you look at this page, you'll notice that it's really just one directive, the Frieze pattern directive, that what created each one of these different patterns. So I'm just hopping between a parameter, which is what the pattern is, and each one of these different patterns you see on the page is, again, the same directive, but with a different parameter, which is the function with which you draw that first image that then repeats. And if you want to check out the directive, I encourage you to do so. So the directive is being used as a template for functions that draw SVGs on the page. And the attributes of the directive are the parameters of the function with which to draw. And using directives in this way was really useful for creating this book, because when I'm creating the book, I don't really want to care about the illustrations I'm creating. I want to be able to quickly iterate them by just updating the parameter of a function, the attribute of a directive. And I want to be able to simply drop into the HTML of a book's page, hey, I want this type of illustration to go here because that would complement this content.
Question.
Yes?
Are we technically looking at SVG animations or just snapshots of SVG?
You're technically looking at SVG animations that have been generated on the fly. Going about creating this, I was looking at algorithms as art and directives as templates for designing this art, and algorithm parameters as attributes for these directives. And using directives allowed me to quickly insert parameterized art onto the HTML pages of this book. For example, this is a standard looking page of the book. Here are all these different illustrations. And I don't care what exactly they look like. I just want them to follow the group symmetric properties I was trying to talk about, and I want them to be interactable, and creating this page was just as simple as dropping some directives into some HTML. And they all use this same directive, which is the circular pattern directive, and I'm going to show it to you because I think it's a really good example of why this should be parameterized art. So this is a page I created just for this demo to show you all. This is the circular pattern directive. And what I was trying to create here was one directive that could capture different types of art I was creating. This one has 4 rotations, this pattern. But the number of rotations is really just a parameter to this piece of art. I could increase it to have 5 rotations. And each time it has 5 rotations. Well, what about how in-depth it goes? The number of levels of each, the number of things that repeat on each spoke of this wheel. This time it's 1. I could increase it to 2, see how it's now just one piece that continues getting larger across the spoke of the wheel. And I can increase the number of rotations. Well, there's something else that these patterns can have. They can also have reflection. And there are other parameters as well that go with the circular pattern. I encourage you to check out the code for it. And again, play with this circular dash pattern. And again, this was super useful for me because I used it all over the book. All right. Okay, there are other things I wanted to be able to do with AngularJS that Angular really helped me with. First of all, I wanted to be able to flip through the pages of the book. You know how I was clicking next page and previous page and it felt like I was leafing through a book, or at least that was the intention? Well, how was I going to do that? I also wanted to have each page of the book be its own separate HTML page. So here's like what the directory structure looks like for the book's content. I have a bunch of pages. They should just be static HTML that I can drop these directives into, and where the code lives for implementing the directives or the algorithms that are drawn should live somewhere completely else, in a place that I can make pages like that playing with the circular pattern page. So this was tough because how would you think to do this? You would think to use ngView, right? But I wanted these transitions between pages to be really smooth, and ngView requires another fetch to the server, and that would just be too slow. You wouldn't be able to have that nice animation and make a fetch to the server. Well, the other way that might make sense is to have ngShow or hide on the page. Well, after I started creating a lot of content here, if you have all of these pages in this one singular page application, and you're just not showing them at different times, well, what you have is a bunch of really heavy SVGs all on the page, and you're just selectively showing them at different times, which also becomes really slow, because a lot of SVGs on the page gets really heavy, which you're probably familiar with, and that wasn't going to work either. So what I'm going to tell you about now is a really ugly hack, and this is where you might shake your head, but I think it's relevant for sometimes you just need a hack for a nice solution. So I used I used ngIf to iterate through all the pages in the book, and then an ngRepeat to then ngInclude each one, and within that ngInclude is an ngIf. So only actually render this page if it's this page's turn to be shown. So here's an example of a page that you can see we're on. Well, when you look at the pages above, you can see again they're included and the ng repeat, but the content of them is hidden by the ng if. And if I go to a previous page, that content we were just looking at is gone. All of those SVGs have been taken off, and their onDestroy event has been fired in the directive, and the directive has destroyed them. So they're no longer really clunky and heavy on the page. The other thing about the pages of the book was I wanted to be able to show all the pages together when I was printing. I needed a really simple way to go between having this digital book and having this paper book. So the nice thing about using Angular for that was then it could just be a parameter on the page as to whether I wanted to include all the pages at once or have going between the ngIf. There are also lots of CSS hacks for how you can go from a web page to printable PDF in terms of what pages in your web app you're putting on like what would turn into a paper page when printing. So I have a lot more for you about this project, and if it interests you, please read the coloring book. Thanks for listening, and I encourage you to print it out, color it in, give it to someone to color, invite me to a talk or conference if you want to know more about it, or ask me questions.